Hi guys, welcome back to this channel. My name is Alex. I'm an architect in London and I make videos about architecture. And in today's video, I would like to share 5 tips for School of Architecture and beyond. So the tip number 1 is to develop a sense of self-confidence. Now, architecture and construction industries in general are quite tough professions. And this is because generally there is a lot of money at stake in building projects. And therefore, people get stressed out, and the job of architect is to kind of keep everybody calm by projecting confidence. Okay, so how do you develop a sense of self-confidence? Well, one way to go about it is actually in the School of Architecture, where 80% of time is spent on learning outside the School of Architecture, meaning that you research things online, you read books, and only 20% of learning is actually through tutorials and lectures. And so as you study and you gather knowledge and you try to put that into your design project and show it to tutors, that's the process through which you gain self-confidence, by showing your tutors the work that you're producing. And it's also a lot to do with taking the feedback on developing the critical thinking skills. And what it means is basically an ability, critical thinking is this ability to take other people's criticism or take what they're saying and filter it out by rejecting stuff that is not relevant to you and keeping the stuff that is actually quite useful. Because you have that knowledge that you developed yourself, you can filter out other people's comments and criticism. Okay, so the tip number 2 is that architecture is a marathon and it's not a sprint. And what it means is that you never stop learning. Architecture is simply too broad of a field to know everything there is to know. Like when you graduate School of Architecture, you keep learning. When you become a licensed architect, you still keep learning. And even 10 years down into your career path, there's still ways you can improve what you know in architecture, and there's always ways to find out new stuff about the field. And the other thing about architecture is that there are going to be days when you're absolutely loving what you're doing and the other days when you hate what you're doing. And that's completely okay, because again, architecture is such a broad field that there is simply no way that you're going to be good in every single area that you need to cover. So inevitably there's going to be days when you are not going to be proud or happy with your work. But I think it's important to recognize that you need to look at the bigger picture and the overall trend across the time, and hopefully there's going to be more good days than there are going to be bad days. And I think if you chose architecture for the right reasons, if you're passionate about it, I think there will be more good days in general. Okay, tip number 3 is fight perfectionism. Now, architecture, like most arts, is very subjective and very personal endeavor. And when we design our projects, we're very precious with them, and there's this fear of showing the projects to the tutors and to the peers because there's a fear of getting criticism, getting negative criticism from them. And unfortunately, this kind of attitude prevents the work from being improved upon. And the first thing that people learn when they're in School of Architecture is that typically their work is getting torn apart at the first tutorial. It's a rough kind of training that you go through, but I think it's necessary because, as Steven Pressfield in his book War of Art says, is that arts, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but arts and design is really about numbers game. Like the more iterations you put into work, the better result is going to be. And I think the reason behind that is that it gives you an opportunity to go through a lot of iterations by selectively taking on board the feedback from your tutors and kind of analyzing the work you've done to then move to the next iteration and repeating that process over again. And eventually, after you've done a lot of these in a row, in a kind of sequence, you then end up with a better result than just having one project that you spend half a year on that eventually is actually not as good because it didn't have that kind of feedback process and improvement process. So be open-minded about the changes in your design project, because that's the fastest way to get to a really good project. So the next tip is about reading. I never read that much in university and I regret it. And the reason why I haven't read that much is because I was always quite bad at reading. Like I would read a couple of paragraphs and then I would zone out and completely miss the point. So it was a big barrier for me to get into books and to get into kind of reading architectural literature a lot. But I think reading and also writing subsequently are quite important to sharpen your thinking skills, because you need those skills to be able to communicate your design proposal to others. Now, reading also helps with creativity and come up with new ideas, because you get inspired by other people's work and their thoughts. And the way I go about reading these days is I use Audible for audiobooks, which I found to be quite good way to keep my attention focused and not get disturbed by, the thoughts and not being able to read a paragraph. And so the other thing that I do is I also invest a little bit of time in the actual physical reading. And in terms of what to read, I think all the must-read stuff about architecture is quite important, but also reading in the related fields like arts and science. In science, for example, the language that they use is quite precise, and therefore you can get more interesting ideas, I think, because the way that the language is set is different to the books in arts. And I think lastly as well is trying to find resources or materials online or in the books about how other architects think when they design, like what's the thought process that goes into their design and their development of the ideas. And I think that's a very rich way to get new ideas and also knowing what to do with those ideas to apply to your own design project. Okay, so the next tip is about developing communication skills. And if you think about it, architecture is one of those weird art forms where you don't actually get to make what you're designing. Like, you spend a lot of time on drawing and developing concept, going through these iterations of design process, but you never get to build what you designed. Instead, somebody else is doing that. So in order for your vision to remain the way you intended it, and in order to get the final result the way you envisaged it, it's important to develop communication skills. And equally, I think talking to the client and convincing them that the stuff that you've designed is actually suitable for their needs and is within their budget is quite important as well. The best place to practice these communication skills is in the university with your tutors, by defending your project, defending your design proposal, and being able to explain it in a very simple and not sophisticated way. And I think there's a trend in School of Architecture to use a very difficult and impenetrable language to describe your design proposals. But I think the best projects are actually the ones that can be explained quite easily and that can be grasped by anyone quite quickly. If you like this video, you might like this other video that I made on time management and how we can be more productive to take the control back of our time. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.